Most people lose their advantage before the situation even begins. They explain too much too soon. They react before they've finished observing. They reveal their position in the first exchange through defensiveness, through eagerness, through the simple human discomfort of sitting in uncertainty and not filling it immediately with noise. Meanwhile, the most strategically aware people do something that looks like nothing from the outside. They wait, and while everyone else is busy revealing themselves, they are gathering information that no one intended to give them. There is a principle that runs through Machiavelli's understanding of power that most people overlook entirely, not because it is obscure, but because it runs against every instinct that social anxiety produces. The principle is this: the person who reveals less almost always sees more. Not because silence is a tactic, because silence is a condition. And in that condition, without the noise of your own reactions filling the space, you can actually hear what is happening. Most people never experience this. They move through conversations and conflicts and social situations with the permanent urgency of someone who needs to establish their position before someone else does. They speak to prevent being misunderstood. They defend to prevent being underestimated. They react to prevent being overlooked. And in doing all of this, in the constant management of how they are perceived, they lose access to the most valuable information any situation contains: what the other person is actually thinking, wanting, fearing, and planning. Pay attention to this, because it is one of the most consistent patterns in human interaction. The person who speaks first in a tense conversation almost always reveals more than they intended to. Not because they are careless, but because the pressure of the silence before them was greater than the pressure of caution. They filled it. And in the filling, they handed the other person a map of their anxiety, their priorities, their red lines, their genuine position beneath whatever position they meant to present. The person who waited received that map without giving one in return. The exchange, before a word of substance was spoken, was already uneven. Think about how often this happens in workplace conflicts. A tension has developed between you and a colleague, something unresolved, something that has been building. You both know it. And then you are in a room together, and the silence of the unaddressed thing sits between you. Most people in that situation speak first. They address it, or they overperform normalcy, or they say something that signals they are aware of the tension and want it resolved. Each of these is a revelation. It tells the other person how much the tension is costing you. It tells them how urgently you need resolution. It tells them, without your having intended to tell them anything, exactly how much leverage the situation gives them. The person who can sit in that silence, who can be present in the tension without being driven by it into premature speech, receives something different. They watch. They see what the colleague does with the silence, whether they fill it, what they fill it with. Whether their performance of normalcy has a quality of effort in it that reveals discomfort they were trying to conceal. Whether they are, beneath the surface of the interaction, more anxious about the unresolved thing than you are. That information determines what you do next, and you only have access to it if you haven't already spent it on the urgency of speaking first. The surprising part is that most people understand this in theory and almost never apply it in practice. Because the pressure to fill silence is not intellectual, it is physical. It lives in the body, in the slight acceleration of the heartbeat that accompanies unresolved tension, in the specific discomfort of sitting with uncertainty when certainty feels one sentence away. The discipline of waiting is not the discipline of having the right idea. It is the discipline of tolerating that physical discomfort long enough for the other person to feel it too, and to act from it before you do. Most people never notice that frustration is one of the most revealing emotional states a person can enter in front of you. When someone becomes frustrated, when they expected a reaction you didn't give, when they pushed for a response that didn't arrive, when the conversation didn't move in the direction their strategy required, they frequently abandon the managed version of their behavior and move into the real one. The argument they were holding in reserve gets deployed prematurely. The position they intended to reach through careful negotiation gets stated directly out of impatience. The opinion they had been strategically withholding comes out because the withholding became harder than the saying. This is where it becomes interesting. You didn't extract that information through confrontation. You didn't pressure them into honesty. You simply declined to perform the reaction they were waiting for, and the waiting itself did the work. The absence of your response was enough to move them into a posture they hadn't planned to adopt yet. Look closely at what happens in relationships when one person develops the discipline of not reacting immediately to a difficult thing the other person has said. Most couples, most close friendships, most family disagreements operate on the assumption that statements produce reactions and reactions produce counterreactions, and the whole sequence escalates according to its own momentum until someone exhausts themselves and stops. The person who introduces a pause into that sequence, who receives the difficult thing, sits with it genuinely, and responds from a considered place rather than an immediate one, changes the entire architecture of the exchange. Not because the pause is a technique, because the pause produces a different quality of response, and a different quality of response produces a different conversation, and a different conversation often produces a different outcome than the one the original sequence was heading toward. The uncomfortable truth is that most conflicts are lost before they begin, not through lack of argument, but through lack of information. People enter confrontations having decided what the situation is, and they fight for that version of it, and sometimes they win the fight, and the version they won was wrong. They were arguing for a conclusion they formed before they had the facts to support it. And the reason they didn't have the facts is that they moved too soon, before the other person had shown them what was actually at stake, what was actually motivating the opposition, what the situation actually was beneath the version they had decided it was. Strategic patience is not passivity. This distinction is critical and most people miss it entirely. The person who waits is not disengaged. They are not avoiding. They are not hoping the problem resolves itself. They are actively gathering. Every moment of observation is work. The specific, demanding work of holding your own reactions still long enough to see what the situation actually contains. It requires more discipline than speaking. It produces more information than confrontation. And it leaves your position intact, unexposed, unmapped, still entirely yours to deploy when the moment is actually right rather than merely urgent. Pay attention to what happens in negotiations of any kind, professional or personal. The person who names a number first has almost always weakened their position, not because the number was wrong, but because the number revealed their assessment. It told the other person where they stand. It gave the other person's response a target it wouldn't have had if the silence had been held a moment longer. Most people, in a negotiation's opening silence, feel the pressure to define the space. The person who can leave the space undefined receives something more useful. They receive what the other person needed enough to define it for them. This is what people miss. Information is rarely transferred through what people intend to say. It transfers through what they say in the moments they didn't plan. The aside that reveals the real priority, the question that reveals the real concern, the defensiveness that reveals the real vulnerability, the over-explaining that reveals the real uncertainty. These moments exist in every conversation. They are available to anyone paying the quality of attention that is only possible when you are not simultaneously managing your own output. Think about how often you have left a conversation and remembered something the other person said, something minor, something they threw in almost incidentally, that, in retrospect, told you everything you needed to know about their actual position. You noticed it at the time and filed it away and only later understood what it meant. Now imagine receiving that information and understanding its significance in real time, not in retrospect, hours later, after the decisions were already made. That is the return on the investment of sustained, undistracted attention. And sustained, undistracted attention is only possible when you are not spending your cognitive resources on performing your own reaction. The dangerous part is that emotional reactivity and observation are genuinely incompatible, not because emotional people are less intelligent, but because emotion focuses attention inward, toward the feeling and its management, away from the external information the situation is producing. The person who is angry is not watching clearly. The person who is hurt is not listening accurately. The person who is anxious is filtering everything through the anxiety and seeing a version of the situation shaped by the feeling rather than the facts. This is not a moral failing. It is simply how emotion works. It was designed to produce action, not observation. And action in the moments that most require observation is almost always premature. Machiavelli's understanding of this was not cynical. It was realistic. He observed that the most durable advantages in any domain, professional, political, personal, belonged not to the most aggressive, but to the most informed. And the most informed were those who had learned to receive more than they transmitted, who moved through situations gathering the intelligence that other people's impatience and emotion provided freely, who understood that most people will tell you exactly what you need to know about them if you can simply resist the urge to interrupt the telling. Look closely at the people in your own life who seem to navigate complex situations with an ease that others can't quite explain. They are rarely the loudest. They are rarely the quickest to establish a position. They often seem, from the outside, to be doing relatively little, listening, observing, asking the occasional question that seems minor but lands somewhere specific. What they are actually doing is building a picture of the situation that is more complete than anyone else's, because they collected it before anyone thought to withhold it. The person who speaks first defines the conversation, but the person who listens first understands it. And understanding it at depth, before committing to a position, that is what separates the response that works from the response that felt necessary in the moment and cost something that wasn't recoverable afterward. Most people never realize that the thing they're most afraid of in silence, being seen as passive, as disengaged, as someone without a position, is the opposite of what strategic silence produces. What it produces, in those who observe it from the outside with any real attention, is the specific impression of someone who does not need to perform their intelligence because they are too busy actually using it. That impression, calm, present, apparently unhurried, is one of the most powerful social signals available. It communicates more about genuine confidence than anything you could say in the space you chose not to fill. The strongest position is rarely held by the person who speaks first, reacts first, or rushes to establish themselves before the situation has finished showing them what it is. It belongs to the person who understands more than they reveal, who observes more than they announce, who allows time to do what emotion would have interrupted, to expose what was always there, to clarify what was always true, to show, with the patient accuracy of accumulated observation, exactly who each person in the situation actually is and what they actually want. That person is not passive. They are simply operating in a different relationship to time than everyone else in the room. They know something everyone else has forgotten, that the situation will reveal itself if you let it. And what it reveals, when you have the discipline to wait for it, is almost always more useful than anything you would have produced by rushing.